Chapter 1: Gravity's Grind. The hum was the first thing. The hum was the last thing. It was the perpetual, life-sustaining breath of the Chrysalis Clinic, a low-frequency vibration that sank into a man's bones and stayed there. Omar Ben Ali had stopped noticing it months ago, the same way a planet dweller stops noticing the weight of their own air. His attention was on the access panel, its cover plate cool against his palms. 3 of the 4 mag screws spun free with a practiced twist of his wrist driver. The 4th was stubborn. "Come on, you piece of," he muttered, applying firm, even pressure. The driver whirred, the screw groaned, then surrendered with a final, sharp click. Omar set the plate on the polished floor of the service corridor, revealing a dense nest of fiber-optic lines and power conduits. A single red light blinked where a green one should have been steady. "Hygia," Omar said to the empty corridor. His voice was flat, tired. A serene female voice answered from a hidden speaker grill above him. "I am here, Technician Ben Ali. Run a Level 3 diagnostic on the comms relay for VIP Suite Gamma. I'm showing a signal degradation fault at Junction 7 Alpha." He reached into the panel with a pair of insulated pincers, his movements economical. He had performed this exact task 100 times. The clients in the VIP suites paid for perfection, and perfection meant uninterrupted, high-fidelity communication with their stockbrokers and estranged families on Earth. "Running diagnostic," Hygia confirmed. "The fault is intermittent, a periodic fluctuation in power draw from Sublevel C Bio-Waste Reclamation Unit 3. The draw is 0.012% outside of optimal parameters." Omar paused, pincers hovering over a blue-sheathed cable. "The recycler, what's it doing pulling power from the comms grid?" "The rerouting is a tertiary failsafe, Technician. The unit's primary power conduit is reporting resonance spikes. I have logged a work order for your review." He grunted, another problem to add to the list. The clinic was a marvel of orbital engineering, a gleaming white jewel hanging in the black, but it was still a machine. Machines broke. It was his job to fix them. Fine, just reboot the relay, give them their connection. Rebooting. Signal integrity in Suite Gamma is restored. Good. He worked in reverse, his hands moving with the easy confidence of routine. He replaced the panel, the mag screws sinking into their sockets with satisfying clicks. He stood, his joints protesting the crouch. At 47, the 0G days of his youth were a distant memory. This station simulated a comfortable 0.9 G, a constant, gentle pressure that kept the bones from turning to dust and the muscles from withering. It also made his knees ache after a long shift. He walked down the corridor, the soles of his work boots squeaking on the immaculate floor. These service tunnels were the station's arteries, stark and utilitarian. White walls, gray floors, yellow safety lines. A universe away from the client side with its sculpted walls, its holographic art displays, and its air scented with something calming and expensive. He passed a pressure door leading to the main concourse. Through its thick, diamond-shaped window, he saw a woman, a client, obviously strolling by. She wore a flowing silk robe, her face a serene, unlined mask. Her eyes slid right over the window, not seeing him, not even registering the existence of the world he inhabited. To her, the station ran on magic, not on men with aching knees and grease-stained hands. He continued toward the maintenance hub, his mind already turning to the work order for the biorecycler. Unit 3. That was one of the new high-capacity models, installed 6 months ago. It processed the clinic's considerable biological output, excised tissue, suctioned fat, discarded blood, bone fragments. Everything that was carved, scraped, and suctioned away in the pursuit of physical perfection ended up there. The recycler's job was to render it all down to a sterile, inert sludge, ready for high-temperature plasma incineration. A resonance spike. It was probably nothing. A failing capacitor, a loose connection. But it was a deviation from the hum. And in the vast, silent emptiness of space, any change in the station's rhythm, no matter how small, was a thing to be noted. Chapter 2. Chronokinetic Factor 7. Dr. Lena Sarin observed the final simulation on the grand, wall-mounted display. Intricate lattices of cellular structures bloomed and folded in on themselves, rendered in vibrant, clinical blues and greens. Her reflection floated ghost-like on the screen's surface. A woman of sharp angles and sharper intellect, her graying hair pulled into a severe bun, her white coat immaculate. "The protein cascade is stable," she announced, her voice precise, cutting through the quiet of her private laboratory. "Cellular integration at 99.87%. There are no aberrant markers. It is perfect." Seated in a plush observation chair, Magnus Sterling coughed, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to shake his entire skeletal frame. A web of transparent tubes connected him to a chrome monolith that monitored his vitals with a soft, rhythmic chime. "Perfection is what I have paid for, doctor. Nothing less." His voice, though weak, was layered with the unquestionable authority of a man who had bought and sold entire countries. "And perfection is what you shall receive, Magnus," Lena replied, turning from the screen. She approached him, her gaze analytical, taking in the papery skin, the clouded eyes, the slight tremor in his hand. "Tomorrow, the first dose of chronokinetic factor 7 will be introduced to your system. The compound will target senescent cells, the dead weight your body has accumulated over 142 years. It will not simply destroy them. It will provide a catalyst for their replacement, stimulating your own dormant stem cells to rebuild tissue, rejuvenate organs. It is not a cosmetic. It is a reset." "A reset," Sterling echoed, a flicker of something hope perhaps in his tired eyes. "You are certain there are no risks?" "The only risk is in a flawed application which will not happen. I will oversee the procedure myself. Every component of the CK7 has been synthesized right here on the station, in conditions of absolute sterility. The compound is pure. Your body will accept it as its own." She clasped her hands behind her back, a posture of finality. This was her magnum opus. Decades of research, billions of sterling's own dollars in funding had led to this. The reversal of aging itself. Her private terminal chimed discreetly. She glanced at it. A minor alert. A power fluctuation in the comms grid, cross-referenced with a resonance spike in the bio-waste sector. She dismissed it with a flick of her finger. Insignificant. The station's AI, HYGIA, was programmed to report every anomaly, no matter how trivial. It was a testament to the system's thoroughness, but it often produced a deluge of useless data. Her focus was on the miracle scheduled for tomorrow, not the station's plumbing. "Your final pre-op preparations will begin at 600, she told Sterling. "I expect you to be resting until then." Sterling gave a curt nod, his attention already elsewhere, perhaps on the life he intended to live after his rebirth. A manservant appeared, silent and efficient, to wheel the old man and his life support rig out of the lab. Once alone, Lena allowed herself a small, tight smile. She walked back to the main screen, calling up the live feed from the CK7 synthesis chamber. Inside a pressurized, sterile glass enclosure, robotic arms moved with inhuman grace, manipulating vials of shimmering, golden liquid. The culmination of her life's work. Nothing could be allowed to interfere. The thought was not a fear, it was a command. She turned her attention back to the terminal, her brow furrowing slightly. She pulled up the detailed logs for the biorecycler anomaly, a resonance spike. Unusual but not unheard of. The unit's job was messy. It broke down complex organic polymers. Sometimes the process was loud. Still, she sent a query to the AI. HYGIA. What was the composition of the last processing cycle in Unit 3? "One moment, Doctor." The AI's voice was as serene as ever. The cycle consisted of standard biological waste materials, predominantly adipose and epithelial tissues, trace elements of neuromuscular fibers and cancellous bone. Lena's eyes narrowed. "Show me the energy consumption graph for the last 72 hours. A complex waveform appeared on her screen, mostly flat with predictable spikes during active cycles. But there in the last 12 hours was something new, a low, persistent vibration, a rhythmic pulse that wasn't part of the standard operating procedure. It was almost biological." She shook her head, dismissing the absurd thought. It was a machine, a complex, temperamental machine, but a machine nonetheless. She had more important things to consider than the groans of the station's garbage disposal. She closed the file. Chapter 3: The Recycler's Song. The service lift descended with a low hum, carrying Omar down into the bowels of the station. Sublevel C was colder than the upper decks, and the air had a metallic, ozonic tang. This was the industrial heart, a place of humming transformers, thick coolant pipes beaded with condensation, and the constant, thrumming presence of the station's heavy machinery. The work order glowed on his data pad. Bio-Waste Reclamation Unit 3. Investigate and resolve power resonance spikes. He found the unit at the end of a long, graded catwalk. It was a massive, stainless steel cylinder, 3 stories tall, bristling with pipes and access hatches. A faint, low-frequency thrumming vibrated up through the soles of his boots. It wasn't the clean, steady hum of a healthy machine. This was a discordant, grinding rhythm, like a gigantic animal chewing on stones. "HYGIA status on Unit 3, he said, his voice loud over the noise. "Unit 3 is currently in a standby cycle, Technician Benali. All primary systems are reporting within nominal parameters." Nominal, it sounds like a rock tumbler full of engine blocks. He ran a hand along a feeder pipe. The vibration was strong, rhythmic. A heavy thump, thump, thump resonated through the metal. It was slow, almost like a massive, sluggish heartbeat. He circled the base of the machine, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim light. He spotted a diagnostic port near the primary sludge outlet. He jacked in his data pad and lines of code scrolled across the screen. Energy consumption was erratic. Temperature was fluctuating wildly inside the core despite the standby status. And the internal mass sensors were wrong. The machine should be nearly empty. It was reporting over 200 kilograms of shifting, semi-solid matter. HYGIA, when was the last purge cycle for this unit? Cycle 88B was completed at 04:17 station time. The unit was verified empty via internal scan. Omar stared at the readings on his pad, then at the hulking machine. Well, your scan was wrong. The thumping grew louder, more insistent. Thump, thump, thump. He noticed something else. A dark, viscous substance was seeping from a pressure seal near the bottom of the main chamber. It wasn't the gray, inert sludge the machine was supposed to produce. This was a deep, rust-colored ooze, thick and glistening. It smelled faintly of copper and ammonia. He knelt, shining his light on it. The substance seemed to slowly, almost imperceptibly, contract and expand in the beam. A new sound started, high and thin, weaving through the bass thrumming. It was a wet, tearing noise, followed by a soft, squelching impact against the inside of the tank. Thump, squelch, thump, squelch. Omar's stomach tightened. He had been on stations for 30 years. He had heard every sound a machine could make as it died. This was not one of them. He stood up and backed away slowly, his hand reaching for the comms unit on his belt. Soren, get me Dr. Soren. Dr. Soren is unavailable, HYGA replied instantly. I don't care. This is a priority 1 maintenance alert. There's something wrong with the recycler on sublevel C something, alive in it. The words sounded insane even as he said them. Crack. A sound like a breaking bone, amplified 100 times, echoed from inside the tank. It was followed by a deafening shriek of tearing metal. Omar's gaze shot up to a circular maintenance hatch 10 meters up the side of the cylinder. The thick steel of the hatch was bulging outward, the metal groaning in protest. A dark line appeared down its center. Thump. The hatch bulged further, the line splitting open. The rust-colored ooze began to drip from the fresh tear. Omar did not wait for another thump. He turned and ran. He sprinted down the graded catwalk, his heavy boots clanging against the metal. He didn't look behind him, but he could hear it. The final, explosive shriek of tortured steel as the hatch gave way. The wet, heavy slap of something massive hitting the graded floor. And a new sound. A sound of dragging, of multiple limbs pulling a great weight across the metal. It was not a sound any machine should ever make. Chapter 4, Code Gray. The klaxon ripped through the serene quiet of the VIP concourse. A piercing, cyclical shriek that sliced through the scented air and holographic art. Red lights flashed, sweeping across the sculpted walls and panicked faces. Code Gray, biohazard containment failure. Sublevel C, all station personnel initiate lockdown protocols. This is not a drill. HYGIA's voice, stripped of its usual calm, blared from every speaker. In the VIP suite, Dr. Soren's head snapped up. On her monitor, a schematic of the station was already showing the cascading effects of the alarm. Blast doors slammed shut with percussive booms that vibrated through the deck. Entire sections flashed red, sealing themselves off from the rest of the station. "What is the meaning of this?" Magnus Sterling demanded, his voice thin with alarm. His manservant stood frozen, his face a pale mask of confusion. "A containment failure," Soren said, her mind racing. She was already cross-referencing the alert with the anomaly reports. Biorecycler Unit 3. Omar Ben Ali's Priority 1 alert had been logged just seconds before the system-wide alarm. Something alive in it. The words from his frantic message echoed in her thoughts. An impossible, absurd notion. "Containment of what?" Sterling pressed. Before she could answer, a heavy steel blast door slid shut over the entrance to the suite, sealing them in. The click of its magnetic locks was a sound of absolute finality. Down in the maintenance hub, Omar scrambled through a pressure door just as it began to hiss shut. He fell to his knees on the other side, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door sealed behind him, cutting off the horrific dragging sound. He was in a small access node, surrounded by junction boxes and conduits. He was safe for the moment, and he was trapped. He slapped the control panel, but the light was red. System override, code gray. All over the station, chaos bloomed. In the main infirmary, Nurse Marco Diaz was in the middle of dressing a patient's minor burn when the alarm hit. He shoved his patient, a startled stockbroker, into a private room and slammed the door just as the main blast shields descended over the observation windows, plunging the ward into the crimson gloom of the emergency lighting. He could hear distant screaming from the main concourse before it was cut off. Chief Declan Hale, the head of security, was in his office reviewing shift rosters. The alarm sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He grabbed his sidearm, a heavy-caliber kinetic pulse pistol, and ran for the door. "HYGIA, give me visual from sub-level C, catwalk 4, he barked as he moved. "Visual feed unavailable. Camera link severed," the AI reported. "Then give me the last recorded image." A static-filled frame appeared on his wrist display. It showed a distorted view of the catwalk, and something dark and massive occupying the space where Recycler Unit 3's hatch used to be. The image was too warped to make out details, but it was huge. Hale's training was for pirates, saboteurs, and hostage situations. Not this. He reached his command post, a cramped room with a dozen monitors, most of them now showing static or sealed blast doors. Two of his junior officers stared at the screens, their faces bloodless. "Lock down everything," Hale ordered, his voice tight. "No door opens without my direct authorization. Get me a channel to Dr. Soren, now." In her sealed lab, Dr. Soren watched the chaos unfold on her master terminal. She saw the network of sealed sections. She saw the severed communication and camera links emanating from sub-level C like a dark stain. She saw the life sign indicators on that level wink out, one by one. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. HYGIA's internal sensor network was still partially active. It was tracking a single, large mass moving from sub-level C. It was not using the corridors. It was moving through the station's primary ventilation shafts, shafts that were, she realized with a sickening lurch, connected to every section of the station, including the VIP wing. The mass was moving slowly, erratically, but it was moving upward. Something alive. Benali's words came again. She pulled up the composition data from the last recycler cycle: adipose tissue, epithelial cells, neuromuscular fibers, and her own project file for CK7. The compound worked by stimulating dormant stem cells. The recycler, in its attempts to break down the biological waste, must have created an energy field, a resonance that, instead of destroying the cells, had activated them. It had taken all those discarded pieces of people and had, impossibly, stitched them together into something new, something that was now loose inside her station. Doctor, Sterling's voice was sharp with fear. What is happening? Soren turned from the monitor, her face a carefully composed mask that betrayed none of the horror she was processing. There has been an incident, she said, her voice dangerously calm. But we are secure in here. It was a lie. She knew with chilling certainty that the thing climbing through the walls would be hungry, and she knew what it would be hungry for. Chapter 5: An Acquired Taste. The amalgam moved through the darkness of the ventilation shaft. It was not a creature of thought or malice. It was an entity of pure primal need, a frantic, agonizing craving that was the totality of its existence. Its form was an obscene mockery of life, a shifting mass of fused tissues, limbs at odd angles, and eyes that opened and closed without purpose. Patches of skin, hair, and muscle, remnants of a dozen different people, rippled as it dragged its immense, asymmetrical weight forward. It moved by instinct. The station was a map of smells and vibrations, and one scent, one specific biological marker, pulled it onward and upward. It was a complex aroma of proteins and rare enzymes, a scent that promised to soothe the screaming, empty hunger in its composite cells. In a small sanitation depot on sublevel B, a young technician named Kara Sharma was cowering behind a stack of supply crates. The code gray had trapped her here. She listened to the silence, broken only by the hum of the emergency lights and the frantic beating of her own heart. She held a heavy wrench, its metal cold and slick in her sweaty hands. A new sound reached her, a wet, rhythmic scraping from the large ventilation grate above her head. She froze, her eyes wide, fixed on the grate. The scraping stopped. For a moment there was only silence again. Then the thin metal louvers of the grate began to bend, pushed outward by a slow, immense pressure. One by one, they popped from their moorings with sharp, metallic snaps. Kara scrambled backward, stifling a scream with her fist. A thick, rust-colored fluid began to drip onto the floor, sizzling faintly. The amalgam did not rush. It seeped. A pseudopod of mottled flesh, studded with what looked like human teeth, oozed through the widening gap. It was followed by a section of torso, a pale arm extending from it, its fingers twitching. The creature lowered itself to the floor with a wet, heavy slap that shook the small room. It was bigger than she could have imagined. A hillock of living flesh, its surface glistening. Multiple eyes, all different colors and sizes, swiveled in their sockets, scanning the room. Kara didn't run, she couldn't. Her body refused to obey. The amalgam's attention was not on her. Its head, A lumpy, misshapen sphere of tissue with a gaping orifice that might have been a mouth, turned toward a small biohazard container in the corner. The container held discarded swabs and tissue samples from the infirmary. The creature dragged itself toward the bin, ignoring the terrified woman completely. It nudged the container with a malformed limb, tipping it over. The contents spilled out. It lowered its mass over the small pile of medical waste. There was a series of soft, wet, tearing sounds. It was feeding. It seemed to absorb the tissues directly into its body. After a moment, a low, shuddering moan vibrated from its core. The hunger was still there. The small samples were an appetizer, an insignificant morsel that only sharpened the craving. It had what it needed from this room. Its sensory organs, a horrific amalgamation of olfactory nerves and receptor cells, locked onto the true source of the scent far above. It was so much stronger now, so pure. The amalgam turned, its mismatched eyes falling upon Kara for the first time. It registered her, a source of biomass, warmth, but not what it needed. It was an obstacle, with a speed that was utterly terrifying in a creature so large and misshapen. An arm-like appendage shot out, not to grab her, but to shove her aside. It sent her flying into a metal shelving unit, her head connecting with a sharp crack. She slumped to the floor, unconscious, as the creature flowed toward the door, leaving her broken among the scattered supplies. In the VIP suite, Dr. Soren watched a schematic, a cold dread coiling in her gut. She saw the creature's biosignature leave the ventilation system and enter the service corridors of Sublevel B. She watched as it bypassed life sign after life sign, ignoring the pockets of trapped, terrified staff. It was not on a rampage. It was on a hunt, and the trail it was following was leading inexorably to them. "Magnus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The CK7 treatment. The primary reagent is derived from a rare strain of your own cultured bone marrow cells." Sterling looked at her, his confusion turning to dawning horror. "My cells, what are you saying?" "The creature," Soren said, her eyes fixed on the monitor, on the blinking red icon that represented the amalgam as it began to climb again. "It's made of the cast-off parts of my other patients. It's incomplete. It's unstable." She finally met his terrified gaze. "I believe it is hunting for the one thing that can complete its biology. It is hunting for you." Chapter 6. Lines of Communication. Omar's world was the size of a closet. The access node was cramped, the air thick with the smell of ozone and his own sweat. He had tried the door controls a dozen times. The system remained locked down tight. Panic was a wolf circling just outside the firelight of his training. He kept it at bay by focusing on the problem. Not the monster, not the screams he imagined, but the immediate, solvable problem. He was trapped. His datapad was his only link. Most station-wide comms were a mess of static and looping emergency broadcasts, but a direct link to the HYGIA mainframe was still functional. He bypassed the public channels, diving deep into the station's back-end architecture. He was a maintenance tech, not a slicer, but he knew the digital backdoors because he had helped install them. HYGIA, he typed into the command line, foregoing the voice interface. He didn't want to make a sound. "Show me security schematic for Sector Delta 7. I need a hardline path. The AI's response was instantaneous, text appearing below his query. Technician Benali, your security clearance does not permit manual override of code gray protocols. Omar swore under his breath and tried another approach. Log entry. Possible structural failure, service corridor 12. Requesting schematic to find alternate egress. Potential risk to primary life support conduit. He was lying, but it was a plausible lie. A flicker of hesitation in the system, then a new screen bloomed on his datapad. A detailed map of his immediate area, showing power lines, water pipes, and data conduits. The blast door in front of him was solid, but 20 meters down the corridor was another access node. And between his current position and that one ran a narrow, man-sized maintenance conduit for the coolant systems. It would be a tight squeeze, and cold, but it was a way out. He found the access panel for the conduit behind a nest of thick power cables. It was sealed with manual bolts, not electronic locks. An emergency override for when the power failed completely. He put his shoulder into it, grunting with effort as the old, stiff bolts screeched in protest. The panel swung inward with a heavy clang, revealing a dark, circular tunnel barely a meter in diameter. A wave of frigid air washed over him. He hesitated, peering into the blackness. He thought of the dragging sound he'd heard, the sound of something huge and wet moving where it shouldn't. Was he climbing from a cage into a tomb? The thought was paralyzing, but staying here was a death sentence. At least the conduit was a choice. Before climbing in, he tried the comms again. He needed a human, not an AI. He routed a signal through a series of diagnostic relays, a trick he'd used before to talk to his wife on Earth without paying the exorbitant data fees. He targeted the security command post. "Hale, Chief Hale, do you read me?" He whispered into the datapad's microphone. The line was filled with hiss, then a voice cut through. "Who is this? Identify yourself." It was Hale, his voice strained. "It's Ben Nali, Omar Ben Nali. I was on sub-level C. I saw it, Chief. I saw what came out of the recycler." There was a pause. The hiss of the connection seemed to grow louder. "Ben Nali, where are you now?" "Access node D7, near the main coolant exchange." "What is that thing? What's happening out there?" "It's a bioform of unknown origin." Hale's voice was clipped, professional, but Omar could hear the tension underneath. "Hostile, it's big, and it's moving upstairs. We have multiple casualties in the concourse." The word casualties hung in the air between them. "I'm trying to make my way to the maintenance hub. The conduits should be clear." "Negative, Benali, you stay put. That's an order. I don't want civilians wandering around." "With all due respect, Chief, I'm not a civilian. I'm the guy who knows how this station breathes. I can get to the hub, and from there, I can access the environmental controls for the whole damn station. I can vent a section if I have to. Can you do that from your office?" Silence. Omar knew he had him. Hale was a soldier. He thought in terms of bullets and barricades. But this wasn't a firefight. This was pest control. "All right, Benali, but you watch your six, and you keep this channel open. Let me know if you see anything at all." "Understood." Omar secured his datapad to his belt and with one last look at the sealed access node, pushed himself into the chilling darkness of the coolant conduit. The cold hit him immediately, seeping through his jumpsuit. The smooth, curved walls pressed in on all sides. It was like being swallowed. He began to crawl forward inch by painful inch into the frozen guts of the machine. Chapter 7. The Scent of Prey. Dr. Soren's lab had become a prison of her own design. The blast door was impenetrable. The air recyclers hummed. And Magnus Sterling, the nexus of the entire crisis, was beginning to unravel. "You have to get me out of here," he rasped, his voice trembling. He had pushed himself from his chair and was now packing, a frail old man tethered to his humming life support rig like a dog on a leash. "Call your security. Call the board. They will send a ship. They will destroy this thing." "There is no one to call," Soren stated, her voice cold and devoid of comfort. She was watching the station schematic, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. "All external communications have been severed. A precaution, I assume, by Chief Hale to prevent panic or an external entity taking control. We are alone." Her gaze was fixed on the blinking red icon of the amalgam. It had stopped on sub-level B for a moment. She allowed a sliver of hope. Perhaps it had found something else. Perhaps the trace samples in the sanitation depot had been enough. The hope vanished as the icon began to move again, faster this time. It was climbing through a primary service shaft, heading directly for the VIP wing. The appetizer was done. It was coming for the main course. "It's on its way," she said, more to herself than to him. "Then we must reason with it," Sterling said, his voice rising with hysteria. "It is made of people, you said, your patients. Talk to it, offer it something." "It is not a person, Magnus. It is a biological imperative, a feedback loop of hunger and stimulus. It cannot be reasoned with any more than you can reason with a flood." She turned from the screen to face him, her expression grim. "But you have given me an idea." She walked over to the CK7 synthesis chamber. Inside, the final, purified dose rested in a shielded vial, its golden liquid seeming to glow with an inner light. This was the most concentrated form of the compound on the station. The scent, the biological marker the creature was tracking, would be 1,000 times stronger from this vial than from the diluted traces within Sterling's own body. It was a lure, a bomb. "What are you doing?" Sterling asked, watching her with wide, fearful eyes. "Recontextualizing the problem," Soren replied. She tapped a command into the synthesis unit's control panel. A slender robotic arm whirred to life, carefully picking up the vial. "The creature is hunting you by scent. If we can provide a stronger scent, we can redirect it." "Redirect it where?" "To the medical bay, or the engine room, anywhere but here." She began typing rapidly, mapping a new route for the station's pneumatic delivery system, the network of vacuum tubes used to transport medical samples and small items. She could send the vial on a journey, and hopefully the creature would follow. A new icon appeared on her screen, a small green blinking light. Technician Omar Benali, active comms link. It was originating from the service corridors near her level. She opened the channel. "Dr. Soren," the voice was a ragged whisper. "Benali, I am here. Where are you?" In the coolant lines, I'm trying to move. I can hear it, doctor. It's in the walls. It's scraping, like nails on metal. Soren's blood ran cold. He was close, closer than she'd thought, and if he could hear it, it was already here. A deep, resonant boom echoed from above them. Not the sharp crack of a weapon, but the heavy, dull impact of immense weight hitting solid steel. Dust rained down from the ceiling panels. Sterling let out a strangled cry. Another boom, louder this time, directly over the lab. The lights flickered. The holographic art on the walls distorted into digital screams before vanishing. The amalgam was no longer using the ventilation shafts. It was on the roof of the lab, and it was trying to beat its way in. Chapter 8: A View from the Armory. Declan Hale watched the station die on his monitors. One by one, the camera feeds that were still active showed scenes of carnage or eerie, blood-streaked emptiness. He saw a body floating in the zero-G orchidarium, drifting through a cloud of exotic, vibrant petals. He saw a desperate, bloody handprint smeared across the inside of a window in the main dining hall. "Sir," one of his junior officers, a kid named Calloway, said, his voice shaking, "life signs in the entire residential quarter just went dark." "I see that, Calloway," Hale said, his teeth clenched. His strategy of containment had failed. He had locked down the station, and in doing so, he had turned every sealed section into a slaughterhouse. The creature wasn't like a team of pirates you could pin down in a firefight. It didn't use doors. His private comm crackled. "Hale, Hale, can you hear me? It's on top of my lab." It was Soren. He could hear the impacts in the background, heavy and rhythmic. "I hear it, doctor. Stay calm." "Calm. It's trying to beat its way through a meter of reinforced hull plating." "Benali," Hale said, switching channels. "Talk to me. What's your position?" "Still in the pipes," Omar's voice came back, strained. "I'm almost to the maintenance hub. The noise, it's right above me. It's deafening." Hale looked at the schematic. Soren's lab, the VIP wing, and directly adjacent the central station maintenance hub. They were all clustered together. A single point of failure. A single point of attack. "Soren, what does this thing want?" Hale demanded. "Why your lab?" There was a pause. "It's complicated. It's drawn to a biological agent in my lab and to its primary source." "The old man," Hale muttered, understanding dawning. "Sterling." The creature wasn't rampaging. It was a predator hunting specific prey, and he had locked the prey in a box with no way out. "Sir," Calloway said, pointing to another screen. "Movement, infirmary level." Hale's eyes snapped to the monitor. It was a shaky feed from a camera in a supply closet, its lens partially obscured. But he could see him. Nurse Marco Diaz. He was moving fast, pushing a gurney piled high with medical supplies. On top of the pile was a heavy-duty plasma cutter, the kind used for emergency demolitions. "Patch me through to him," Hale ordered. The line clicked open. "Diaz, this is Chief Hale. What is your status?" "Doing a damn sight more than you are, Chief." Diaz's voice was sharp, breathless. "I've got 3 survivors in here, one of them a kid. The main door is sealed, but there's a service hatch that leads to the emergency stairwell. I'm cutting us a new exit." Hold your position, nurse. That is a direct order. You want to give orders, come down here and give them in person, Diaz shot back. Until then, I'm getting my people out. The beast is on this level. I can smell it. Smells like an old butcher shop. The line went dead. Hale slammed his fist on the console. The chain of command was broken. The station was fragmenting into islands of desperate survivors, each fighting their own war. He was a general with no army. He looked at the weapons locker at the far end of the command post. It was filled with kinetic pulse rifles, concussion grenades, stun batons, all useless against a creature that didn't seem to have vital organs to shoot or a nervous system to stun. But there was one weapon, in a reinforced case at the very back, the T9 incinerator unit. It was officially classified as a decontamination tool. In reality, it was a military-grade flamethrower capable of melting through a blast door in seconds. It was dangerous, volatile, and strictly for last resort scenarios. Hale looked at the screens, at the dead zones and the dying zones. This was the last resort. Calloway, he said, his voice low and hard. Prep the incinerator. I'm going on a walk. Chapter 9, A Calculated Risk. The impacts from above were relentless. Each boom shook the lab, sending tremors through the floor. A hairline crack appeared in the thick plasteel of the main observation window. Magnus Sterling was huddled in a corner, weeping softly. Dr. Sorin ignored him. Her focus was absolute, her fingers flying across the control panel. She had the lure, the vial of pure CK7. She had a plan, but the plan required time and the ceiling was about to give way. "Benali," she said into her calm, her voice tight. "What is the structural integrity of the hull plating above my lab?" "Not good," came Omar's strained reply. "It was designed to withstand micrometeorites, not a 2-ton monster using it as a drum. It's going to fail. Soon. I need a diversion. I need you to draw its attention, even for a minute." There was a pause filled with the sound of Omar's ragged breathing. "Draw its attention. Lady, are you insane? What am I supposed to do, throw rocks at it?" "Think technician. You're in the maintenance hub, the environmental controls. Is there anything you can vent? Anything you can flood?" Omar's mind raced. He was at the main panel for the station's fire suppression system, a system designed to spray inert, fire-retardant gas. Harmless to humans, but the sudden pressure change and violent release. "I can vent the halon reserves into the service space above your lab," he said, his fingers already flying across his own panel. "It'll be loud and cold. It might startle it." "Do it," Sorin ordered. "Now." Omar slammed his hand down on a large, red manual release button. A deep, vibrating groan filled the maintenance hub as massive valves opened. On the other side of the wall, in the space above Sorin's lab, nozzles erupted with a deafening roar, spewing a thick, white cloud of freezing gas. In the lab, the rhythmic pounding stopped. There was a new sound, a high-pitched, furious screech of confusion and pain from above. The sound of something being sprayed with liquid nitrogen. "It's working," Sorin breathed, a sliver of triumph in her voice. She turned back to her console, She had her window. She programmed the pneumatic delivery system, setting a destination, the main engine room at the far end of the station. She placed the vial of CK7 into the receiver port. With a hiss of compressed air, the golden liquid vanished into the tube network. The lure was away. Did it work? Omar's voice crackled over the comm. Is it moving? Soren's eyes were glued to the schematic. The large, red icon representing the amalgam was no longer stationary. It was slithering away from the lab, moving with renewed speed and purpose. But it wasn't following the pneumatic tube. Her heart sank. The scent of the pure CK7 was now permeating the station's sealed atmosphere through the tube network itself. The creature wasn't following the vial. It was following the trail, and the trail led directly from her lab to the central pneumatic hub. A hub that was located, she realized with a fresh wave of horror, inside the maintenance section, right next to Omar. "Benali," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's coming your way." "What? I thought you sent it to the engine room." "The scent is leading it to the transport nexus first. You have to get out of there. Now." A new sound came over Omar's comm, a sound that wasn't him. It was a faint, wet, dragging noise. It was coming from the coolant conduit he had just crawled out of. He had sealed the access panel, but now he could hear the thick metal groaning, bending inward. He was no longer in a cage. He was in the baited trap. Chapter 10: The Butcher's Bill. Marco Diaz worked with the focused, desperate energy of a field medic on a losing battlefield. He had managed to get the service hatch open, a screeching rectangle of hope leading into a dark, narrow stairwell. "Go, go," he urged, pushing the last of his small group of survivors through. A young couple who had been in for minor cosmetic work and a terrified kitchen porter who was no older than 17. "Stay behind me. Do not make a sound." He took point, his makeshift weapon, a heavy fire extinguisher held ready. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows down the metal stairs. The air was cold, filled with the coppery scent of old blood. Diaz knew that scent. He had smelled it too many times in the ER back on Earth. It was the smell of bad things. He led them downward, away from the chaos of the infirmary level. His plan was simple: get to the lower docking bay. There were short-range maintenance pods there. Not comfortable, not fast, but they had life support and could break away from the station. It was a chance. As they reached the landing for sub-level C, he held up a hand, signaling a halt. He heard something, a soft, rhythmic dripping. He peered over the railing into the darkness of the industrial level below. His stomach clenched. The floor of the sub-level was changed. A grotesque carpet of glistening, pinkish-gray biomass was spread across the floor, pulsing with a faint, internal light. It looked like living tissue, veined with dark, thick tendrils that snaked up the walls and into machinery. This was the creature's nest, its womb. And standing in the middle of it was something new. It was roughly human-shaped, but its limbs were too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was a patchwork of scar tissue and raw, exposed muscle. It stood over the remains of a security guard, its head bowed. It wasn't eating. It was absorbing. Thin filaments extended from its hands, sinking into the corpse, which seemed to deflate and dry out before his eyes. Marco slowly, carefully began to back away, motioning for the others to do the same. This wasn't the main creature, the hulking horror Hale had described on the comms before the channel went dead. This was something else, a lesser version, a soldier, an antibody. The kitchen porter, his eyes wide with terror, took a step back and his foot scraped loudly against the metal stair. The creature's head snapped up. It had no face, just a smooth, blank expanse of skin where features should have been. But it saw them. It straightened up, its long arms dangling, and let out a chittering, clicking sound like 1,000 insects. "Run," Marco whispered, his voice hoarse. He shoved the couple and the porter up the stairs ahead of him and turned to face the thing. It was already moving, scrambling toward the stairwell with an arachnoid grace that was horrifying to behold. Marco didn't hesitate. He pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and unleashed a blinding white cloud of C02 foam directly at the creature's blank face. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound of fury, and recoiled, clawing at its head. It bought them seconds. Marco turned and pounded up the stairs after the others, the creature's furious clicks echoing from below. They burst back out onto the infirmary level, gasping for air. He slammed the heavy stairwell door shut, spinning the manual locking wheel until his muscles screamed. Heavy, frantic thuds began to shake the door. He looked at the survivors, their faces etched with a new, deeper level of terror. He had seen the butcher, and now he knew the true cost of this outbreak. The amalgam wasn't just killing them. It was recycling. It was making more of itself. His small chance of escape had just dwindled to nothing. They were no longer just running from a monster. They were running from an army. Chapter 11, Pressure Point. The metal of the conduit panel groaned, bowing inward. Omar scrambled back from the sound, his datapad clattering to the floor of the maintenance hub. The space that had felt like a temporary sanctuary moments before was now a steel-walled coffin. The dragging, wet scraping sound was louder now, immediate, right on the other side of that straining piece of metal. He saw the bolts holding the panel in place begin to deform, the threads stripping under a slow, inexorable pressure. This thing didn't need to break the lock. It was simply going to push the entire panel through the wall. His mind flashed with images of the rust-colored ooze, the impossible bulk of the creature he had fled on sub-level C. He was unarmed, cornered. The wolf of panic was no longer circling. It was at his throat. He backed away until his shoulders hit the main environmental control console. His fingers splayed across the smooth, cool surface. The console, he wasn't unarmed. His eyes darted across the complex interface, his training cutting through the fear. Temperature controls, atmospheric composition, pressure regulation. He couldn't fight it, but he could change the environment. Drastically. The conduit panel let out a final, piercing shriek as one of the bolts shot across the room like a bullet, ricocheting off the far wall. The panel slammed inward, bent into a concave dish, held only by the last of its twisted moorings. A thick, multi-jointed limb, the color of a day-old bruise and glistening with slime, snaked through the gap. It blindly swept the air, questing. Omar's fingers flew across the panel. He isolated the ventilation system for the maintenance hub and the adjoining service corridors. He found the override for the emergency liquid nitrogen reserves, the same system he had used to help Sauron. But he wasn't going to vent it into the corridor. He was going to pull it into the room. He slammed his palm down on the execution command. Warning, rapid decompression and temperature drop imminent. The screen flashed red. With a roar that was part machine, part storm, the ceiling vents opened. It was not a gentle hiss of air. It was a violent, explosive release. A hurricane of super-chilled gas erupted into the maintenance hub. The temperature plummeted instantly. Frost bloomed across every surface, a crystalline tide that raced across the walls and floor. The air fogged, then turned into a blizzard of ice particles. The seeking limb of the amalgam recoiled as if burned. A high-pitched, agonized hiss came from the conduit. The intense, sudden cold was a profound shock to its unstable biology. Omar shielded his face with his arms, the frigid blast tearing at his jumpsuit, stealing the breath from his lungs. It was a desperate, suicidal move. He was flash-freezing his own shelter. He had seconds before the cold rendered him unconscious. Through the swirling vortex of ice and gas, he saw the limb retract. He heard the creature moving away, a sound of pained, frantic retreat. It was working. The thing was abandoning the attack, choosing to bypass this sudden pocket of absolute zero. He stumbled toward the far side of the hub, his movements becoming sluggish, his thoughts slow and thick like molasses. He had to get out. The hub connected to a vertical service ladder. Up. He had to go up. He reached the ladder, his gloves frozen stiff, his fingers clumsy and numb. He gripped a rung, the metal so cold it felt like it was burning his skin through the glove. He hauled himself upward, his muscles screaming in protest. The roaring of the vents began to subside as the reserve tank emptied, leaving behind an arctic silence. He climbed, forcing his protesting body rung after rung, escaping the cryogenic tomb he had created. He emerged onto a small service gantry one level up, collapsing onto the grated floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. He had survived. He had driven it back. He lay there gasping, his vision swimming. As his senses slowly returned, he became aware of a new indicator light blinking on a nearby control panel. It was a proximity alert for the primary lift shaft. A heavy service elevator, one of the few things still running on an independent power grid, was ascending. A quick check on his datapad confirmed its origin, the security command post. Its destination, this level. Hail, the chief was coming, and judging by the power signature of the lift, he was bringing something heavy. A spark of hope ignited in Omar's frozen chest. He wasn't alone anymore. Chapter 12, Terms of Engagement. The service elevator was a rattling metal box, its interior stark and functional. Declan Hale stood in the center, the T9 incinerator unit held in a two-handed grip. It was heavier than it looked, its tanks filled with a volatile, jellied accelerant. Calloway stood by the controls, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped a standard pulse rifle. Approaching service level beta, Calloway announced, his voice a nervous squeak. Ben Ali, Hale spoke into his comm, his voice steady. "Report. The creature, where is it?" Omar's reply was slurred, punctuated by chattering teeth. "It's gone. I vented the LN2 reserves into the hub, froze the whole damn room. I think it scared it off. It's heading up toward the central spire, toward the labs." "Copy that. We're on your level. Stay put. We'll come to you." The lift shuddered to a halt. The doors slid open with a groan, revealing the grim, frost-covered maintenance hub. Omar was a huddled shape on the gantry above them, barely visible through the lingering icy fog. Hale stepped out, the incinerator held at the ready. The cold was immediate and biting. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of white frost. He saw the bent conduit panel, the dark ooze frozen solid around its edges, a testament to how close Omar had come. "Calloway, stay with the lift. Keep the door open," Hale ordered. He climbed the short ladder to the gantry. "Benali." Omar looked up. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. "Chief, you came. You said you could help me stop this thing. I'm here to take you up on that offer." Hale helped Omar to his feet. The technician was shivering violently, but his eyes were clear. "Soren, Dr. Soren has a plan," Omar said, his words coming in ragged bursts. "She sent a lure, a vial of something. The creature wants it. She tried to send it to the engine room, but the thing is following the scent trail, not the package. So it's still heading for the labs," Hale concluded. "We need to get ahead of it." He looked around the maintenance area. "Is there another way up? A faster way than the service shafts this thing is using?" Omar nodded, pointing toward a heavily reinforced hatch in the floor. "The main reactor access shaft. It's a straight shot down to the core and up to the bridge, shielded. The creature can't get through it, but the access is triple locked. Security, engineering, and command." Hale's jaw tightened. "I'm security, you're engineering. Now all we need is command." He pulled out his data pad, trying to raise Soren again. The line was dead. The impacts he had heard earlier must have finally severed her communications array. "What about the nurse?" Calloway's voice crackled from the lift. "The one who cut his way out of the infirmary." Hale paused. Diaz. He was insubordinate, a rogue element, but he was also a survivor. And he was senior medical staff, which gave him a degree of command authority in a crisis. More importantly, Hale had seen him on the monitors. He knew how to take initiative. "HYGIA," Hale commanded. "Locate Ward Nurse Marco Diaz." Ward Nurse Diaz is in emergency stairwell Gamma, proceeding to sublevel D, the AI responded. "His biosigns indicate elevated stress, but he is mobile." Sublevel D, the lower docking bay. He was still trying to get his people to the pods. "Benali, can you get that shaft open from your end?" Hale asked. Omar was already at a console, his numb fingers tapping at the interface. "I can override the engineering lock, but the command authorization has to come from the bridge or a senior staff terminal. Or," he looked up, a grim understanding on his face, "a med-staff terminal in a life-or-death emergency." "Find him," Hale said, his decision made. He turned to Calloway. "You're with me. We're going to get our command authorization." He left Omar to his work. The new terms of engagement were clear. They weren't just hunting a monster anymore. They were trying to assemble a team, and their next recruit was 2 levels down, running for his life. Chapter 13. The Second Strain. The stairwell door thudded behind them, the sound of the creature's frantic scrabbling fading as they descended. Marco Diaz didn't slow down. He pushed his small, terrified flock onward, down into the guts of the station. "Where are we going?" the young woman from the couple asked, her voice thin with terror. "Docking bay," Marco grunted, not breaking stride. "There are maintenance pods, small, but they can get us off this floating tomb." They emerged into the cavernous space of the lower docking bay. It was eerily silent. Emergency lights cast long shadows from the rows of sleek, sealed escape pods, the ones reserved for the clients. Their destination was at the far end, a corrugated metal wall separating the main bay from the utility dock. Behind that wall were the single-man pods, the station's glorified space scooters. The 17-year-old kitchen porter, whose name was Wren, suddenly stopped. "Listen." Marco froze. He heard it too, a faint, wet, chittering sound. It wasn't coming from the stairwell behind them. It was coming from inside the docking bay. He scanned the shadows, his eyes tracing the gantries and cargo containers. He saw a flicker of movement near the ceiling, then another. They were up there. More of them. Smaller, faster versions of the thing he'd fought at the stairwell door. They clung to the ceiling like spiders, their long limbs folded beneath them. They were being herded. "The pods," the woman's partner said, his voice a panicked whisper. He pointed to the row of VIP escape pods. One of them had its entryway iris open, its interior lights glowing invitingly. "There, we can get in that one." "No," Marco said, his voice low and firm. "It's a trap." It was too perfect, too easy. The creatures were letting them see it. They were guiding them toward it. "I'm not waiting around to be eaten," the man said, grabbing his partner's hand. He made a break for it, pulling her along. They sprinted across the open floor toward the waiting pod. "Stop, you fools!" Marco yelled, but it was too late. The chittering from the ceiling intensified. The spider-like creatures didn't descend. They just watched. The couple reached the pod, scrambling inside. The man slapped the large, green activation panel on the interior wall. The iris began to spiral shut. For a second, Marco thought he had been wrong. Then he saw it. As the iris closed, the interior lights of the pod flickered and died, plunging it into darkness. A split second later they flared again, but the light was a sickening biological red. A wet, tearing shriek, abruptly cut off, echoed from within the sealed pod. The metal shell of the pod bulged outward once, twice, before a spray of dark liquid erupted from a pressure seam. Then silence. Wren, the kitchen porter, vomited onto the floor. Marco grabbed the back of the boy's collar, hauling him back toward the utility dock wall. "Move, now." The creatures on the ceiling began to descend, their movements no longer patient. They dropped to the floor with soft thuds, unfolding to their full, horrifying height. They were between Marco and his goal. A voice blared from a nearby service speaker. "Diaz, this is Chief Hale. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." "A little late for that, Chief," Marco yelled back. shoving Wren behind a stack of cargo crates. He hefted his fire extinguisher, his only weapon. It felt pathetic against the small army of faceless nightmares now advancing on his position. One of the creatures lunged, its movements a blur. Marco swung the extinguisher, catching it in the torso. The blow landed with a wet, meaty crunch, staggering the thing. But another was already coming from the side. Suddenly, the world erupted in a blinding flash and a deafening concussion. A grenade. It wasn't an explosive fragmentation type, but a concussive charge. The blast wave sent the nearest creatures flying, their unnatural bodies tumbling through the air. They hit the ground and lay twitching, disoriented. Hale and Calloway appeared at the far end of the bay, pulse rifles raised. "Get down!" Hale roared. Marco dropped, pulling Wren with him. A volley of plasma bolts, brilliant blue streaks of light, seared the air over their heads. They struck the nearest creatures, not piercing them but cooking them. The things burst into flames, shrieking in a chorus of inhuman agony, the smell of burnt meat filling the vast chamber. The surviving creatures, seeing the new, more dangerous threat, scattered, retreating back into the shadows and sealing gantries. Hale and Calloway advanced, covering the angles. Hale knelt beside Marco. "Nurse, glad you could join us." "I was having a party," Marco said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "Looks like I forgot to send you an invitation." He looked at the burning remains of the creatures, then at the sealed VIP pod. "They're smart. They set a trap." "They're learning," Hale said, his face grim. "And they're multiplying. We need to get off this level. I need your help. We need your command authorization to get to the reactor shaft." Marco stared at him, then at Wren, who was shaking uncontrollably. His plan of escaping in a maintenance pod felt childish now. He had seen the nest. He had seen the soldiers. This wasn't about running anymore. "What's the plan, Chief?" Marco asked, his voice hardening. They weren't just running from the fire. They had to find a way to put it out. Chapter 14, The Spire. The reactor access shaft was a throat of brushed steel and warning labels. Omar had the engineering panel open, its guts spilling a spaghetti of wires. He had bypassed his own lock, but the command and security overrides remained, glowing a stubborn, defiant red. He worked with a feverish intensity, trying to find another way, a flaw in the system he could exploit. The station's hum was louder here, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up from the fusion core far below. He could still feel the phantom chill of the maintenance hub in his bones. The memory of that questing limb, the sheer alien pressure of the amalgam, was seared into his mind. He worked because working was the only thing that kept the terror at bay. His datapad chimed. A new message from Soren. It wasn't voice or text, but a data packet. He opened it. It was a 3D schematic, a complex molecular model of the CK7 compound, annotated with her own frantic notes. "Primary bonding agent is a custom retrovirus," one note read. "Designed to target and rewrite cellular senescence, highly aggressive. In the amalgam, it acts as a hive mind signal. It's not just hunger, it's a summons. Every cell wants to rejoin the whole." Another note chilled him to the core. "The unstable replication, The soldiers Diaz reported must be a secondary mutation. The retrovirus is interacting with the station's recycled air, the background radiation. It's evolving, creating drones. They are not drawn to the CK7. Their imperative is to protect the primary bioform, to clear a path for it. The creature wasn't just a predator, it was a queen, and it was building an army to escort it to its prize. He looked at the station schematic, tracing the amalgam's path. It was moving slowly but steadily up a central service spire, a massive column of engineering and life support that ran through the heart of the station like a spine. The spire terminated at the highest point of the station, the observation deck, and next to it, the heavily shielded labs of the VIP wing. Soren's lab. Soren was not the target. Magnus Sterling was. The amalgam was climbing the tower to get to the old king. The comm on his datapad crackled. "Benali, we have Diaz. We're on our way back to your position. Prep for entry." Relief washed over Omar, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He turned back to the access panel as he heard the distant clang of the service elevator arriving. Hale, Calloway, and Diaz arrived minutes later, with the young Porter Wren trailing behind them like a frightened ghost. Diaz looked haggard, his nurse's scrubs smeared with grime and something that looked horribly like dried blood. His eyes, however, were sharp and defiant. "Let's get this over with," Diaz said, walking straight to the command console. He swiped his ID card, a high-level medical clearance, and placed his palm on the bioscanner. The red light on the command override flickered, then turned green with a satisfying chirp. "Your turn, Chief," Omar said. Hale stepped up, keying in his code. The final red light switched to green. There was a deep thud of massive locking bolts retracting, and the circular hatch in the floor hissed, a ring of light appearing around its edge. "The shaft leads up and down," Omar explained, pointing. "Up goes to the upper service levels, right below the observation deck. Down goes to the reactor." "We go up," Hale said decisively. "We get to the VIP wing before it does. We move Sterling, get him somewhere the creature can't reach. The reactor housing itself. It's the most shielded part of the station." "Move him," Diaz scoffed. "We should space the old bastard. He's the bait. Get rid of the bait, you get rid of the predator." "We are not murdering a civilian nurse," Hale shot back, his voice like iron. "Our job is to protect the people on this station. All of them, that includes him." "He's not a person anymore, he's a walking dinner bell," Diaz argued, his voice rising. "Enough," Hale's voice echoed in the confined space. He looked from Diaz's angry face to Omar's weary one. "Soren's plan to use the vial as a lure failed. My plan to contain it failed. Diaz's plan to run failed. We stop failing now. We get Sterling. We move him to the reactor core. Benali," he looked at Omar, "can you flood the VIP wing with that LN2 trick of yours once we have him out?" Omar thought for a second, picturing the station's schematics in his mind. "The labs have their own emergency venting. If I can get to a terminal up there, I can do more than flood it. I can vent it directly into space. Everything. Air, furniture, monster." A grim silence settled over the group. It was a desperate, brutal plan. but it was the first plan that felt like it might actually work. "All right," Hale said, nodding slowly. He racked the charging handle on the incinerator, the sound loud and final. "Let's go hunting." He pushed the hatch. It swung open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness and ascending into a narrow tube of light. Above them lay the spire and the final confrontation. Chapter 15: The Queen's Gambit. The amalgam knew nothing of plans or tactics. It knew only the pull, the all-consuming, defining imperative that drew it upward. The scent of the pure, concentrated CK7 in the pneumatic tubes had been a maddening, glorious beacon, but it was fading, dissipating into the station's recycled air. Now a different scent asserted itself, weaker but far more constant. The source, the wellspring, the old man. It climbed the central service spire, a vertical city of pipes, conduits, and humming machinery. Its bulk was a liability here. It had to reshape itself, elongating its form, oozing through gaps and around massive transformers. Its movement was slow, deliberate, and unstoppable. It scraped against metal, leaving a trail of glistening, organic residue in its wake. It was aware of the lesser parts of itself, the drones, moving through the station below. It felt their presence as a faint background chorus of shared instinct. It felt their encounters with the loud, bright, separate ones. It felt their destruction as brief, sharp notes of pain in the hive mind, quickly fading. They were expendable. They were tools to clear the path. Their purpose was to distract, to herd, to draw the fire of the hostile, separate minds. The true prize was above. Its journey was interrupted by a new sensation. A section of the spire ahead of it suddenly went cold. Not the searing, shocking cold of the maintenance hub, but a deep, pervasive chill. Frost began to creep down the pipes toward it. It paused, its sensory nodes twitching. This was a barrier, an inconvenience. It did not retreat, it adapted. From deep within its gelatinous mass, it began to secrete a new substance. A thick, viscous mucus that coated its outer membrane. The mucus was an insulator, a biological antifreeze. It was a costly process consuming precious energy, but the pull from above was too strong to be denied. Coated in this protective slime, it began to move again, pushing into the chilled section, the frost hissing and steaming where it made contact with its new skin. It reached the upper levels, the domain of the wealthy, the quiet, carpeted corridors of the VIP wing. It flowed from a service grate into a hallway decorated with serene holographic waterfalls. The art flickered and died as its bioelectric field interfered with the projectors. It was close now. The scent was intoxicating, emanating from behind a single, heavy blast door. It pressed its mass against the door. It could feel the vibrations from within, the low hum of machinery, the faint, terrified tremor of the prey. It did not bother trying to beat its way through this one. It had learned. The separate ones built strong walls. It began to spread itself, its tissue flowing like thick, living mortar. It was not attacking the door. It was attacking the wall. It seeped into the seams where the wall met the floor and the ceiling. Its secretions were acidic, dissolving the polymers and metal alloys of the station's structure. It was a slow, patient process. It was unmaking its prison from the outside in. Inside the lab, Dr. Soren watched in horror as the edges of the blast door began to glow a dull red. A thin, acrid smoke, smelling of melted plastic and boiled acid, began to seep into the room. The integrity alarms shrieked. "It's dissolving the door frame," she yelled, backing away. Magnus Sterling, who had been sitting in a stunned, catatonic silence, was galvanized by this new, immediate threat. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild. "No, no, you will not have me." He looked around the lab, his gaze falling on the synthesis chamber where the CK7 had been made. The vial was gone, but the machinery was still there. And next to it was a small, reinforced container of biological waste, the last batch of his own cultured cells, the raw material for the next dose. Before Soren could stop him, he lunged for the chamber's emergency purge valve. It was a fail-safe, designed to jettison contaminated materials directly into space. "Sterling, no," Soren screamed. With the last, desperate strength of a terrified old man, he yanked the lever. There was a deafening roar as a small port on the exterior of the hull blew open. The lab's atmosphere vented into the void with explosive force. Sterling, the life support rig, and the container of his own cells were sucked out into the black, a silent, frozen scream swallowed by the infinite. Soren was saved only by her proximity to the inner lab. The pressure drop slammed the connecting door shut, the magnetic locks engaging just as the last of the air was torn from the main chamber. She lay on the floor of her small office, her ears ringing, staring at the sealed door. Beyond it was a vacuum. On the other side of the wall, the amalgam paused. The scent, the overwhelming, intoxicating pull that had been its entire reason for being, was gone, vanished, snatched away into the cold, empty nothing. The hunger remained, a vast, echoing void inside it, but the compass that guided it was broken. It was lost. A new, terrifying sensation began to creep into its nascent consciousness, a feeling of frantic, aimless confusion. And from that confusion, something new began to bloom, not hunger, not instinct, rage. Chapter 16. The Echo of Hunger. The silence that followed the explosive decompression was absolute. Omar and the others, huddled at the top of the reactor shaft ladder, had heard the distant roar and felt the shudder through the station's frame. Every eye was on the tactical display of Hale's datapad, which showed the VIP lab section flashing with a stark, purple icon. Catastrophic hull breach. Atmosphere 0. "He's gone," Diaz breathed, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Sterling, he's gone." "He spaced himself," Hale said, his face a grim mask. "And the bait along with him." He looked at the group. "The primary target is eliminated. The mission is scrubbed." "So what, we just go back?" Calloway asked, his voice hopeful. "Is it over?" "No," Omar said quietly, his own eyes fixed on the schematic. He was tracking the large, red biosignature of the amalgam. It had stopped its assault on the lab. It was stationary, quiescent, in the service corridor just outside the breached section. "It's still there. It hasn't moved." "Why?" Diaz demanded. "If the bait is gone, it should be. I don't know, hibernating, dying." "Maybe it's confused," Wren, the young porter, whispered. He had barely spoken a word since the docking bay. Maybe it doesn't know what to do now. Hale's comm unit crackled to life. It was a weak, static-laced signal. This is Dr. Soren. Can anyone read me? Soren, it's Hale. Are you alive? I am. Her voice was thin, reedy. I'm in my private office. The main lab is a vacuum, Sterling. He opened the purge valve. We saw, Hale confirmed. What is the status of the creature? It's outside my location. It's quiet. I don't understand. The stimulus is gone. It should be dormant. As she spoke, the red icon on Hale's datapad began to move. It wasn't the slow, deliberate crawl of before. It was moving erratically, lashing out, flowing back and forth in the corridor like a caged, furious animal. Then it stopped and began to move with renewed purpose. It wasn't heading away. It was heading toward them. It's moving, Omar reported, his voice tight with alarm. It's coming for the reactor shaft access. But why? Calloway stammered. There's nothing for it here. There is, Diaz said, a look of dreadful realization dawning on his face. He looked at Hale, then at Omar. There's us. It's lost its 5-star meal. Now it's settling for whatever it can find. It's not hunting anymore. It's just killing. The nature of the threat had changed in an instant. They were no longer trying to outsmart a predator with a specific goal. They were facing the senseless, explosive rage of a thwarted god. Soren, we have to get you out of there, Hale said into his comm. Is there an alternate exit, a service hatch? There is one, she replied. In the floor, it leads to the observation deck gantry. We're coming for you, Hale said. Everyone move. He led the way out of the shaft into the upper service corridor. The air here was still, the quiet unnerving. It was a clean, sterile environment, a stark contrast to the carnage they had witnessed below. But the sense of menace was thicker than ever. They were in the heart of the creature's new hunting ground. They moved quickly, Hale in the lead with the incinerator, Calloway and Diaz covering the rear. Omar's job was to navigate. His datapad held out like a divining rod, tracking the approaching monster. Wren, pale and silent, simply tried to keep up. It's closing, Omar warned, his voice low. It's in the parallel corridor. It's going to intersect with us at the next junction. Then we make our stand there, Hale said, his knuckles white on the grip of his weapon. We can't outrun it forever. We give Soren the time she needs to get clear. He looked at the corridor ahead, a simple intersection of white walls. Diaz, Calloway, take cover on the left. Omar with me. Wren, you stay back. They reached the junction. Hale knelt, resting the heavy barrel of the incinerator on his knee. He could hear it now. The familiar, wet, dragging sound amplified by the confined space. It was coming fast. On my mark, Hale whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. The pilot light of the incinerator clicked on with a soft whoosh, casting a flickering, demonic orange light on their faces. They were no longer the prey. They were the ones waiting in ambush. Chapter 17. The Fury. The amalgam was a storm of incoherent rage. The singular, clear purpose that had driven it, the beautiful, golden scent of completion, had been ripped away. What remained was a chaotic symphony of base emotions inherited from the thousands of minds trapped within its flesh. fear, vanity, resentment, and a deep, gnawing agony. The void left by the pull had been filled with a raw, indiscriminate fury. It no longer followed a scent. It followed the subtle vibrations of life, the heat of breathing bodies, the low thrum of their technology. The vibrations were strong ahead, concentrated. It surged forward, its form less cohesive now, more fluid and desperate. Tendrils lashed out, smashing against the corridor walls, leaving deep gouges in the metal. It rounded the corner and saw them. The small, separate ones, the fragile things of bone and skin. They were waiting for it. One of them knelt, holding a metal tube that glowed with a hot, orange light. Hale didn't hesitate. "Light it up," he roared. He squeezed the trigger. A thick, roaring torrent of jellied fire erupted from the nozzle of the T9. The corridor was instantly transformed into an inferno. The fire wasn't a clean gas flame. It was a sticky, burning liquid that clung to every surface it touched. The stream of fire slammed into the amalgam's chest. For a creature born of flesh, it was the ultimate weapon. The monster shrieked, a sound that was not one being but 1,000 voices screaming at once, a psychic backlash that made everyone clench their teeth in agony. Its insulating mucus vaporized. Its outer membrane blackened and cracked, splitting open as the tissue beneath was cooked. It recoiled, slamming back against the corridor wall, trying to retreat from the searing agony. But Hale didn't let up. He swept the stream of fire back and forth, painting the creature in liquid flame. From the left, Diaz and Calloway opened fire with their pulse rifles. The blue bolts of energy struck the burning mass, causing chunks of charred flesh to explode outward. It was working. They were hurting it, driving it back. The amalgam, in its blind fury and pain, did something unexpected. Instead of retreating down the corridor, it flowed up. It poured its mass up the wall and onto the ceiling, defying gravity, the flames still licking at its lower portions. It was trying to flow over them, to drop down behind their firing line. "Ceiling," Omar yelled, pointing. Hale tilted the incinerator upward, but the angle was awkward. The torrent of fire sputtered. He was trying to fight a flood, and the flood was pouring over his head. The burning creature sagged from the ceiling, a chandelier of molten flesh. A massive, flaming tendril swung down like a wrecking ball. It wasn't aimed at Hale. It was aimed at his weapon. The limb smashed into the T9. The impact was immense, throwing Hale backward. The incinerator flew from his hands, skittering across the floor. The fuel line ruptured, spraying volatile jelly across the deck. The amalgam dropped from the ceiling, landing with a wet, sizzling thud between Hale and his weapon. It was horrifically burned, great swathes of it blackened and smoking. But it was still immense, still alive. It ignored the others, its mismatched eyes, weeping fluid, fixing on the man who had hurt it. "Chief," Calloway yelled, firing his rifle, but the bolts seemed to do nothing now, sinking into the charred, non-conductive flesh. The amalgam reared up, its form coalescing. Its rage was now focused. It had a target. It lunged for the disarmed, vulnerable Hale. Chapter 18. An Unexpected Variable. Dr. Lena Sorin crawled out of the service hatch into the skeletal framework of the observation deck gantry. Below her, through the grated floor, was the star-dusted infinity of space. Above, the sweeping plasteel canopy of the observation lounge, now dark and lifeless. She was alive. She was free. Her comm crackled. "Soren, talk to me. What's your status?" It was Hale's voice, but it was distant, punctuated by the roar of the incinerator and the horrifying, multi-voiced shriek of the creature. "I'm out," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm on the observation gantry." "Good, stay there. We've engaged the target." The line was filled with the sounds of combat, then a crash and a yell. Then static. "Hale, Chief Hale, do you copy?" Nothing. She was alone again. The men who had come to rescue her were likely dying just a few corridors away. A familiar, cold logic began to assert itself over her fear. She was a scientist. The problem had changed, but it had not vanished. The creature was no longer driven by a biological imperative she could predict. It was now operating on raw, chaotic emotion. But it was still a biological entity. It still had weaknesses. She looked around the gantry. This area was used for extravehicular repairs. Equipment lockers dotted the walls. Most required security codes she did not have. But one was unlocked, its door slightly ajar. A maintenance worker's oversight from a lifetime ago, before the disaster. Inside was a collection of tools. Spanners, drivers, diagnostic kits, and a heavy-duty laser cutter designed for precision work on the station's hull. It was a tool, not a weapon. It had a short range and a narrow beam, but its cutting temperature was absolute. She hefted it. It was heavy, awkward, but it was something. She made her way along the gantry toward the direction of the fight. The sounds of pulse rifle fire had become sporadic. She heard a man scream. The fighting was dying down, and she had a terrible feeling she knew who had won. She reached an access hatch that led back into the upper service corridors. Peering through its small, reinforced window, she saw the horrific aftermath. The corridor was scorched black. A ruptured and burning flamethrower lay on the floor, the fire slowly eating the spilled fuel. Calloway was slumped against a wall, his rifle by his side, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Diaz was trying to drag an unconscious Hale away from the fighting. And the amalgam was there. It was a ruin of its former self, a mountain of charred, smoking flesh. But it was upright, dominant. It was slowly advancing on Diaz and Hale, its rage giving it a terrible, unstoppable momentum. Omar and the young porter, Wren, were backed against a wall, helpless. The creature had won. Her rescuers were about to be slaughtered. A cold, hard fury rose in Soren. This thing was a perversion of her science, an abomination born from her ambition. It had destroyed her lab, her life's work. It would not have her station. She keyed the manual release on the hatch. It slid open with a hiss. The amalgam turned its bulk at the sound, its remaining eyes fixing on her. She stepped out into the corridor, raising the laser cutter. The tool's focusing beams, 3 small red dots, converged on the creature's center of mass. "You are a failed experiment," she said, her voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. "A biological error, and errors must be corrected." The creature seemed to pause, perhaps recognizing the voice of the one whose science permeated its very being. Soren squeezed the trigger. There was no explosion, no roar. Just a brilliant, silent, needle-thin beam of pure white light that lanced out and struck the amalgam. Where it touched, there was no fire, no melting. The flesh simply ceased to be, sublimated into vapor. It was a precise, surgical strike. The amalgam shrieked, a sound of shock and surprise, and recoiled. It had been hurt before. Burned, shot, battered. But this was different. This was erasure. Soren stood her ground, the beam unwavering. A small, severe woman in a white coat holding back the tide of rage with a scalpel of light. For the first time since it was born, the amalgam felt a new emotion, something that silenced even its rage. It was the primal, inherited memory of fear. Chapter 19, Core Principles. The brilliant, silent beam of the laser cutter was a line of absolute truth in the chaotic corridor. It sliced into the amalgam's charred mass, and the creature scrambled backward, its furious advance broken. It couldn't comprehend this new pain, this effortless unmaking of its own body. "Fall back now," Soren's voice cut through the haze of battle. Diaz, seeing the opportunity, didn't need to be told twice. He heaved the unconscious Hale over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and began retreating down the corridor, back toward the reactor shaft. Omar grabbed Ren, who was frozen in terror, and pulled him along. Soren walked backward, keeping the laser beam fixed on the creature, a fencer holding a wounded beast at bay. The cutter's power pack whined, the pitch getting higher. A warning light began to flash on its side. It was a tool for short, precise bursts, not sustained fire. "It's overheating," she yelled. "I can't hold it for long." They reached the access hatch to the reactor shaft. Diaz bundled Hale through the opening, followed by Omar and Ren. Soren was the last one, the laser beam wavering as the cutter's internal temperature redlined. "Get the hatch," she screamed, deactivating the beam and throwing the dangerously hot tool into the corridor. She scrambled through the opening just as a huge, misshapen tendril smashed into the wall where she had been standing. Omar and Diaz slammed the heavy hatch shut. They spun the locking wheel, the thick bolts shooting home with a series of satisfying final thuds. They were safe. For now. They were in the cramped space at the top of the shaft. Diaz gently lowered Hale to the floor. The security chief was alive, but his breathing was shallow, and a nasty gash on his head was bleeding freely. Calloway was gone, another casualty claimed by the station. "We can't stay here," Diaz said, pressing a field dressing to Hale's head. "That thing will get through the hatch eventually." "Down," Omar said, pointing to the ladder that descended into the darkness of the shaft. "Down is the only way, to the reactor." Soren was leaning against the wall, her composure finally cracking, her body trembling with reaction. The plan was to vent the VIP wing, to expose the creature to vacuum. "The plan failed," Diaz said bluntly. "Sterling took care of the vacuum part himself. Now we have a very angry, very wounded monster with nothing to lose." "My new plan is better," Omar said, a new hardness in his voice. He looked at Soren. "You said the creature is a biological error, you're right. And the way you correct a biological error is to sterilize it. Completely." Soren's eyes widened as she understood his meaning. The reactor core. You mean a full purge, a scram. What's a scram? Ren asked, his voice barely a whisper. It's an emergency shutdown, Soren explained, her voice hushed with awe at the scale of Omar's idea. It involves jettisoning the active fuel rods and flooding the core with neutron-absorbing control rods. The resulting energy release. It's not an explosion. It's a wave of pure, hard radiation. It would sterilize this entire section of the station in a nanosecond. It would kill the creature, Omar confirmed. It would also kill us if we're anywhere nearby, Diaz pointed out, looking at the unconscious Hale. And how do we get the creature to the reactor core in the first place? A silence fell over the group, the weight of the new, desperate gambit settling upon them. They had a weapon that could destroy their enemy, but it was a suicide bomb, and their enemy had no reason to walk into the blast zone. The lure, Soren said suddenly, her mind piecing it together. We lost the original lure, but we can make another. She looked at Diaz, then at Hale's unconscious form. Her gaze was cold, analytical, the gaze of a scientist who has recontextualized the problem one final time. The creature is no longer drawn to Sterling's unique markers, she stated. It is now acting on pure rage. It has imprinted on us, on the ones who fought it, who burned it, who hurt it. Her eyes met Omar's. It's hunting Hale, and you, and me. So we're the bait now, Diaz said, a grim, humorless smile touching his lips. Fantastic. One of us has to be, Soren said. One of us has to lead it down into the heart of the reactor. The rest have to initiate the scram. It's a one-way trip for the lure. The four conscious survivors looked at each other in the dim light of the reactor shaft. The final, terrible phase of their fight had just been defined. One of them would have to make the ultimate sacrifice to save the rest. Chapter 20. The Bait. The air in the reactor shaft was thick with unspoken questions. Who would be the lure? Who would be the executioner? Who would survive? Hale stirred on the floor, groaning. Diaz was immediately at his side, checking his pupils with a small penlight. "Chief, can you hear me?" In Diaz, Hale's voice was slurred. "What happened? The fire?" "The fire went out," Diaz said. "We're clear for now." He looked up at the others. Hale was concussed, in no shape to fight, let alone lead. He was baggage, precious, important baggage. "It has to be me," Omar said, his voice quiet but firm. Everyone looked at him. The amalgam hurt Hale, but it was my trap that froze it. I'm the one who started this. And I'm the only one who can guarantee the scram sequence is initiated properly. The manual overrides are complex. "No," Soren interjected. "Your role is in the control room. The scram requires two people to authorize from two separate consoles. A failsafe. You and Nurse Diaz will be the executioners. I will be the lure." "You," Diaz scoffed. "With all due respect, Doctor, you're a scientist. You're not a soldier." "I am the creature's creator," Soren countered, her voice regaining its iron edge. "There is a connection. It focused on me in that corridor. I can hold its attention. And I know the layout of the reactor housing better than anyone. I designed the shielding." "She's right," Hale rasped, pushing himself into a sitting position with Diaz's help. It imprinted on the threats. We all heard it, but Sauron, she erased part of it. That's a different kind of threat. It will follow her. He looked at Omar. Your job is the reactor. Diaz, you get me to the medical pod near the control room and then you help Omar. Ren, he turned to the terrified young man, you are with me and Diaz. You follow our orders to the letter. Is that clear? Ren just nodded, his eyes wide. The roles were cast. The plan, as insane as it was set. They began their descent, a slow, grim procession down the steel ladder into the humming darkness. The further they went, the louder the hum of the fusion core became, a constant, deep-throated drone that vibrated in their chests. They reached the bottom, emerging into the reactor control level. It was a sterile, circular room, dominated by a huge, armored window that looked directly into the reactor chamber itself. Inside the chamber, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields, was the core, a miniature man-made sun, a sphere of roiling, incandescent plasma that pulsed with terrifying power. This is it, Omar said, moving toward the main control console. Diaz, the secondary console, is over there. We'll have to sync our command inputs. Sauron stood by the massive, shielded door that led into the reactor housing. She took a deep breath, her face pale but resolute. Give me a 5-minute head start. Once I'm inside, seal the door. It will not open again. Diaz walked over to her. He was holding a pulse rifle. He offered it to her. Take this. You might be able to slow it down. Sauron shook her head. My hands must be free, and a weapon will only give me a false sense of hope. She looked past him at the hatch they had just descended from. Get ready. It will not be far behind. She turned and faced the reactor door. She keyed in her access code, and the colossal slab of metal and ceramic slid open, revealing a gantry that led into the maze of coolant pipes and humming machinery surrounding the core. The heat from the chamber washed over her, a dry, oppressive wave. She paused at the threshold and looked back at the small group of survivors, at the men who were trusting her, at the boy who was seeing the very worst of humanity. There was no apology in her eyes, no plea for forgiveness. There was only the cold, hard resolve of a scientist balancing a final, terrible equation. Do not hesitate when the time comes, she said. Then, without another word, she stepped through the door and into the roaring heart of her own creation. The door slid shut behind her, sealing her fate. Chapter 21. The Labyrinth of Glass and Steel. The heat inside the reactor housing was a physical presence. It pressed in on Lena Sauron from all sides, leaching the moisture from her skin, making each breath a conscious effort. The air tasted of hot metal and ozone. The hum of the fusion core was a deafening, all-encompassing roar that vibrated through the grated floor of the gantry, up through her bones, and into her skull. It was the sound of unbound power. She walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the vast, cathedral-like space. This was the true heart of the station, a place no client ever saw, a place of pure, brutal function. Catwalks and gantries crisscrossed in a complex, three-dimensional maze around the central containment sphere, where the miniature sun burned. Coolant pipes thick as her own body snaked through the structure, glowing with a faint blue Chernikov radiation. Her path was deliberate. She didn't run. She moved with a steady, measured pace, letting her scent, her heat signature, her very presence permeate the area. She was the fox, laying a trail for the hound. She checked her data pad, its screen a small, clear island in the overwhelming sensory environment. She had linked it to the control room. A single, blinking red dot showed her position. In 5 minutes, another would appear. The hound. Her mind was strangely calm, stripped of all emotion save for a cold, sharp focus. The terror, the guilt, the ambition, all of it had been burned away, leaving only the problem itself. The variables, the solution, the finality of the equation. She thought of the amalgam. It was her child, in a way, born of her science, her hubris, a living testament to her greatest failure. But it was also a miracle, a chaotic, horrifying, but undeniable leap in biology, an organism created from the refuse of others, a hive mind born from the discarded vanity of the human race. In a purer world, she would have studied it, cherished it. But the world was not pure, and her creation was driven by a rage she now understood. It was the rage of a sentient being that had been given consciousness only to have its one desire, its one purpose, snatched away into the void. It was the ultimate betrayal. She had made it, then she had broken it, and now she would unmake it. A tremor ran through the gantry, distinct from the steady hum of the reactor. A heavy, rhythmic impact from the direction of the main door. It was here. She looked at her data pad. The second red dot appeared just outside the reactor chamber. It was battering the door just as it had with her lab. But this door was different. It was forged to withstand a core breach. It would not break. Soren descended a narrow stairwell, moving deeper into the labyrinth. She followed a coolant line toward a secondary pumping station, a nexus of pipes and valves. It was a dead end, the perfect place to be cornered, the perfect place to make her stand. She waited. The sound of the impact stopped. There was a new sound now, a high-pitched, grinding screech. It was not trying to break the door anymore. It was dissolving the wall next to it just as it had done before. It was learning. She stood in the center of the pumping station, the colossal pipes framing her small form. The heat was immense. Sweat dripped from her brow, instantly evaporating. She was the bait, and the bait had to be appealing. It had to be ready. The screeching stopped. A section of the far wall, 100 meters away, began to glow cherry red. It sagged inward, and then a torrent of molten metal and ceramic poured onto the floor. Through the newly made hole, a dark, massive shape began to flow. The amalgam entered the reactor housing. It had been wounded, burned, erased. But it had also fed. It had absorbed the biomass of the crew and staff it had killed. It was larger, its form more compact and dense. Its rage had cooled from a wildfire into a solid, white-hot core of malevolent intent. It saw her. Across the expanse of humming machinery, it saw the small, separate one who had hurt it most. Soren did not move. She simply watched her creation, her abomination, begin its slow, final journey toward her. She raised her data pad, her thumb hovering over a single, pre-programmed command she had built for Omar. A command that simply read, "Now." Chapter 22. 2 keys, 1 lock. The control room was a bubble of tense, focused silence against the deafening hum of the reactor beyond the armored window. Hale lay on a makeshift bed, Diaz having stabilized him. Wren sat nearby, his eyes wide, watching the two men at the consoles. Omar's fingers moved with a surgeon's precision. He had the scram sequence armed. A cascade of holographic prompts and confirmation windows filled the screen in front of him. He was deep in the machine's language now, the station's most vital and dangerous function laid bare. "Soren is in position," he announced, his voice tight. A small map in the corner of his screen showed her green icon stationary in a section labeled Coolant Pumping Station 3. "She's at a terminal choke point." "And the monster?" Diaz asked from the secondary console. His role was simpler but no less vital. He was the second key. The scram could not be initiated without his simultaneous confirmation. "It's through the wall," Omar said, his eyes tracking the second, larger icon. "It's in the chamber, and it sees her. It's moving toward her." On the main view screen, a camera feed from inside the reactor housing flickered to life, showing a long-distance, heat-hazed view of the scene. They saw Soren, a tiny, defiant figure dwarfed by the colossal machinery. They saw the amalgam, a moving mountain of black, scarred flesh flowing over pipes and gantries, its advance inexorable. "Jesus," Diaz breathed, his knuckles white on his console. "She's holding it there," Omar said. "She's letting it corner her, drawing it as far from the exit as possible." "Get ready," Hale rasped from the floor. His voice was weak but full of command. "Do not fire until it's fully committed. You'll only get one shot." They watched in hypnotic horror as the amalgam closed the distance. It was not rushing. There was a terrible, deliberate certainty to its advance. It was savoring this. It flowed into the pumping station, its bulk filling the space, blocking the only exit. Soren was trapped. On Omar's screen, a new window popped up, a message from Soren's datapad. It contained only one word now. "She's given the signal," Omar said, his throat dry. "Diaz on my mark." He looked at the man across the room. Diaz met his gaze, his face grim, and nodded once. "Initiating final sequence," Omar announced, his voice formal, a strange protocol for the end of the world. He pressed a large, glowing panel on his screen. "Sequence initiated. Authorization 1 is go." "Authorizing," Diaz said, his own hand moving to a similar panel. He pressed it. "Authorization 2 is go." A new sound joined the reactor's hum. A deep, resonant clang as colossal, unseen mechanisms began to move deep within the station's core. Red lights flashed across the control room. A synthesized voice, cold and devoid of emotion, began a countdown. "Warning, reactor scram sequence initiated. Core jettison in 30 seconds. On the view screen, they saw the amalgam lunge. It had Soren cornered, its massive form towering over her. It raised a limb, a grotesque cudgel of fused bone and muscle, to deliver the final blow. 20 seconds. "It's not enough time," Wren cried out. "She's not going to make it." But Soren wasn't looking at the creature. She was looking at her datapad. Her fingers flew across the screen. "What is she doing?" Diaz asked. She's She's overriding the coolant flow, Omar said, his eyes wide with disbelief as he read the data streaming from her pad. She's diverting the primary loop, cutting off the magnetic containment field for. He didn't have to finish. On the screen, they saw it happen. One of the huge coolant pipes next to Soren glowed bright red, then ruptured. But it wasn't coolant that spewed out. It was a torrent of pure, incandescent plasma, a stray tendril of the sun itself, pulled from the failing containment field. It wasn't aimed at the amalgam. It was aimed at her. Lena Soren was consumed in a silent, instantaneous flash of white fire. She was erased, unmade. Her final act was not one of sacrifice, but of suicide, a last, defiant assertion of control over her own end. The amalgam, its killing blow striking nothing but superheated air, reared back. The flash, the sheer energy release, stunned it. It was confused, its prey vanishing at the exact moment of its triumph. 10 seconds, core jettison imminent. The creature stood bewildered in the center of the kill zone, its rage momentarily forgotten, lost in a confusion it could not process. "She bought us the time," Hale whispered from the floor. "She bought us the damn time." 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 23. The Silence of the Stars. The scram was not an explosion. It was a release. Through the armored window, they watched the heart of the reactor chamber open up. The magnetic field that held the miniature sun collapsed. The sphere of plasma, untethered, did not explode. It elongated, tearing apart as it was drawn toward the emergency port that had opened to the void of space. The core of the Chrysalis Clinic, the source of all its power and life, was ejected into the cosmos, a silent, fatting teardrop of fire. Simultaneously, a dozen thick black control rods, made of materials that drank neutrons like a sponge, slammed into the reactor housing from all sides. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of invisible, unstoppable energy washed through the chamber. It was not light, not heat, but a pure, hard wave of gamma and neutron radiation. It was the sterile, cleansing fire of a dying star. On the view screen, the image of the amalgam dissolved into a blizzard of white static. The camera, its sensors, its very atoms were torn apart by the radiation wave. The screen went black. The control room was plunged into a new kind of silence. The perpetual, life-sustaining hum of the reactor was gone. The station was dead. All that remained was the whisper of the emergency life support and the frantic, relieved gasps of the 4 survivors. It was over. They sat in the quiet for a long time, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. Diaz checked on Hale, whose breathing was more even now. Omar stared at the blank console, his hands still hovering over the controls. Ren, the young porter, was weeping softly in the corner, his face buried in his hands. Is it really gone?" Ren finally asked, his voice muffled. "Nothing could survive that," Omar said, his voice flat. "Nothing biological. It's a dead zone in there. It'll be radioactive for 1,000 years." Hale, with Diaz's help, sat up. "The emergency beacon, did it deploy?" Omar nodded, tapping at his still-functional data pad. It launched with the core jettison, standard distress signal broadcasting our last known coordinates. Someone will come, eventually. They were alive, stranded on a dead, floating tomb, but alive. The cost had been staggering. The station, the crew, Calloway, Dr. Soren, they had won, but it felt like a bitter, hollow victory. Days bled into one another. They rationed the emergency supplies, the silence of the dead station broken only by their own voices. Hale slowly recovered, his authority returning with his strength. He organized them, assigned tasks, kept their minds from the brink. Diaz, the cynical nurse, became the group's medic and counselor, his gallows humor a strange but welcome comfort. Omar, the quiet technician, became their lifeline, coaxing power from dying batteries, keeping the fragile life support from collapsing. And Ren, the boy who had seen too much, slowly began to heal, finding purpose in small tasks, helping where he could. They talked. They shared stories of their lives before the Chrysalis Clinic, of the families they hoped to see again. They talked about the dead, honoring their sacrifice with quiet words. They never talked about the creature itself. Some things were too vast, too terrible to be contained in language. On the seventh day, a blinking light on Omar's datapad heralded the arrival of a long-range rescue vessel. Hope, real and bright, bloomed in the cold, dead station for the first time. As the rescue ship docked, its airlock hissing open to reveal figures in clean, bright uniforms, Hale paused at the threshold. He looked back at the dark, silent corridors of the station that had been his charge. When they ask what happened here, he said to the others, his voice low and heavy, what do we tell them? We tell them the truth, Diaz said, his arm around Ren's shoulder. We tell them about the cost of perfection. Omar looked at the rescue crew, then back at the reactor control room where they had made their final stand. He thought of Soren, the brilliant, terrible woman who had been both their damnation and their salvation. He thought of the creature, the amalgam of pain and vanity that had been born in the dark. No, Omar said, his voice quiet but clear. He looked at Hale, then at the others, his gaze unyielding. We tell them there was a reactor malfunction, a tragic accident, nothing more. Hale and Diaz stared at him, understanding dawning in their eyes. The truth was a monster in itself, a thing of congressional hearings, corporate inquisitions, and scientific panic that would haunt them and humanity forever. Some things were better left buried in the silence of the stars. Some stories should never be told. And so, as they stepped from their tomb into the light, they carried with them not only the scars of their survival, but the weight of one last, terrible secret. The Chrysalis Clinic was not just a grave. It was a warning, and they would be its silent, eternal guardians. The end.